I don't dismiss that she's virtuous. Is because
She of course is virtuous. Doesn't have anything to do with the theater.
her poetry.
No, yeah, with the charlatan Shakespeare.
We were gonna write virtuous poetry.
She's a charlatan.
A what? Mm-hmm. He outrivals Chaucer and the 18th century novelist in his command of smut and buttery. He is the most salacious of all the Elizabethan dramatists in the area where there is already stiff competition. There are more than 1,300 sexual allusions in the plays, as well as the repeated use of sexual slang. There are 66 terms for the female vagina. Among them, rough, scut, crack, block, almond's tail, and
put one Shakespeare with the other. He's the third Shakespeare.
He's dirty.
He's not the Shakespeare of the theater of the plays.
He's not?
Not at all. It's the difference.
You could use that as your argument. There are a host of words for the male penis, as well as reference to sodomy, adultery, and fascio. Thou loves labor lost armado, that he allows his loyal mistress with his two. Shakespeare is never more lively and more alert or more witty than in dealing with sexual matters. They are such a pervasive presence that they quite overshadow the ending of Merchant of Venice.
The more you read about Shakespeare, the more his character becomes.
There, he encompasses life. He encompasses life as it is.
I didn't know. I didn't know anything, and I couldn't figure out all that. But now that we read all that,
Sex?
I see better how barbarian charlatan.
Barbaric? Why? Because of the sex?
Nothing to do with the place.
The Merchant of Venice, for example, where a number of obscene puns dominate the opening dialogue. The English crowd has always enjoyed sexual farce and obscenity. Dear, remember the theater. He's making money. They like it. He's trying to have a show here. He knew that such comedy would please the spectators, both higher and lower sort. It pleases both higher and lower types.
He found the books, he stole the books, whatever.
But in his play, sexual puns and sexual allusions are more than just a dramatic device. They are part of the very fabric and texture of his language. His writing is quick with sexual meanings. It could be argued that this is part of the sexual expressiveness of a celibate. Now he's celibate. Or faithful, if absent husband. Here he is, faithful, absent, celibate husband. And you accused him of all this horrible stuff. He goes home with his wife. It can be argued that this is part of the sexual expression of a celibate. You know, Beethoven learned celibacy at a young age. Faithful if absent husband, but common sense suggests otherwise. The printed reminiscences or gossip of his contemporaries strongly indicate that he had a reputation for philandering. He may have been pricked out. Pricked out, maybe he had enough sex for a while. As he puts it, for women's pleasure is a world where sex itself was a dark, dangerous force. The writer of the sonnet seems to have been touched by the fear and horror of venereal disease, and some biographers have even suggested that Shakespeare himself died from a related venereal condition. Nothing in Shakespeare's life and character would exclude the possibility. We don't know how he died and if he got it. I don't know. You think? Maybe. The Elizabethan age was one of great and open promiscuity. London women were known throughout Europe for their friendliness, and travelers professed to be astonished by the freedom and lewdness of conversation between the sexes. It was not only in the capital, however, that sexual activity was commonplace. It was It has been recorded that out of the population of 40,000 adults in the county of Essex, some 15,000 were brought before the church courts for sexual offenses in the period between 1558 and 1603. This is an astonishing high number. Can only reflect upon the even more obvious opportunities and attractions of the city. Well, interesting. This is the English way. It was not always a clean and hygienic period in the matters pertaining to the body, at least from a modern perspective, and the sexual act veered between mud wrestling and perfume coupling in order to avoid the more unpleasant sights and odors. It was customary for men and women to have sexual congress almost fully clothed. It was in many respects a short, furtive act, a mere spilling of animal spirits. In certain of the sonnets, that act provokes shame and disgust. Hamlet is a misogynist. Hamlet here.
Oh, he hates his mother because he hates his father.
And he hates his girlfriend. Loathing for the act of sex is apparent in Measure for Measure, King Lear, in Timon of Athens, and in Troilus and Cressida. This is, of course, the fiction of the plot and cannot be taken as an expression of Shakespeare's opinions on the matter, assuming that he had any at all, but it is a mirror of the reality all around him. How are we doing here? It's a long chapter. The poet's passionate attachment to the young man of the sonnets, whether real or unassumed, suggests that Shakespeare had an understanding of devoted male friendships. We have already noticed the presence of some friendships in the plays. It's also the case that Shakespeare was a born actor and has become apparent through the ages that actors are often possessed by an ambiguous sexuality. The great actor must always have a uniquely sensitive and yielding temperament, capable of assuming 1,000 different modes, and psychologists have often assumed this to be a feminine component inherited from love and imitation of the mother. We do not need to go far down by ways of psychology to find this an eminently sensible observation. From the time of the Greek dramas of the 5th century BC, actors have been classified as wanton or effeminate. In the late 16th century, London preachers and moralists inveighed against the uncertain sexuality of the player's actor. Was it also deemed to be unnatural, an attempt to escape from the nature and to act an act of defiance against God. It does not prove anything about Shakespeare, but it does help to explain the context and society in which he worked. In his writing, we know what it was like to be both Cleopatra and Antony, both Juliet and Romeo. He became Rosalind and Celia, Beatrice and mistress quickly. More than any of his contemporaries, he created memorable female roles. This does not imply that he was in any sense homosexual, but suggests rather an unfixed, floating sexual identity. He had the capacity to be both male and female, and the scope of his art must have affected his life in the world. We may recall here the recently discovered portrait of the Earl of Southampton, apparently dressed as a woman in the late 16th century. It was considered natural and appropriate that high-born males should assert the feminine aspect of their natures. It was part of the Renaissance humanism, considered essential for gentle conduct. The concept of the divine androgyny was an element of the popular fashionable teaching inspired by Renaissance Platonists. This is the proper context in which to understand Shakespeare's invocation of the master-mistress of his passion. His was not an invitation to sodomy, which remained a capital offense in 16th century England, together with heresy and sorcery, even though arguably homosexual poets such as Marlowe draped their illusions in an appropriately classical garb. It was also best demonstrated that in 16th century texts what may be described as theological homosexuality was considered to be a predilection of the noble and the well-born, so it would not have been unthinkable for quote, gentle Shakespeare to make poetic allusions to the subject. It was a love not of the palace, but of the mind. It is instructive to compare the women in his place with the dark lady of the sonnets. His comic heroines are lively and self-assured, which may also imply an implicit reference to their sexual vitality. They have enormous powers of will in a world where, quote, will also meant sexual power and potency. Will Shakespeare was fully aware of this. But there are other females touched by more desperate, dangerous forces. Ted Hughes has noticed in the play's evidence of Shakespeare's loathing of the lustful female, together with an obsession with chastity. Do you think he's into chastity in some ways? To get all that energy. This may be true of the late plays where Miranda, Perdita, and Imogen are altogether non-essential beings, but it is not clear in these accounts whether the preoccupations of Shakespeare have been confused with those of his commentators. There is really no typical Shakespearean woman in other words, it is perhaps more interesting to study the responses they elicit from men. Most obvious and most common reactions is one of sexual jealousy, whether Othello or Desmond or Leonetti's the heroine. This is all the dramatic situation of the sonnets. There is much suspected betrayal and some real infidelity. It has become a commonplace of Shakespearean biography, of course, that Shakespeare suspected his absent wife of unfaithfulness. It is plausible that, but unprovable. We can only say that infidelity, true or false, plays a large part in the plots of his plays, as in the sequence of the sonnets. It is, of course, true that most of Shakespeare's plays invoke the promise and the problems of love, and in all its forms, and that his is the most profound treatment of love in the English language. It is natural and inevitable, therefore, that he should be preoccupied with sexual as part of amatory relationships. But that does not explain why sex is often treated with shame, horror, and disgust. In his treatment of love, he frequently uses the metaphors of warfare. The only couple who seem to be happily married in the plays are Claudius and Gertrude in Hamlet, although, of course, Macbeth and his wife are not without fondness for each other, but these favored pairs are hardly what in the modern world would be called role models. Unhappy love and amatory conflict are the staple of drama, and dramatic convenience does not necessarily reflect Shakespeare's personal misgivings. There is no need to introduce a poignant autobiographical note or end of reading the whole chapter about sex and love. Chapter 53 of Shakespeare.